Imagine being told to build a defensive barrier stretching farther than the distance from New York to Los Angeles, and then keep building until you've covered more than 13,000 miles. No bulldozers, no cranes, no engines, just human hands, simple tools, and determination. It sounds impossible, yet across mountains, deserts, rivers, and some of the harshest landscapes on Earth, generations of workers did exactly that. The greatest surprise isn't that China built the Great Wall, it's that no single generation ever could. The first thing you need to know is that the Great Wall wasn't built all at once. In fact, it wasn't even built by a single empire. When people hear the Great Wall of China, they often imagine one continuous wall constructed from one end to the other under a single emperor. History tells a far more fascinating story. Long before China became a unified empire, the land was divided among rival kingdoms during the Warring States period, roughly between the 5th and 3rd centuries BC. These competing states constantly defended themselves against neighboring rivals and raids from northern nomadic groups. Each kingdom began constructing its own defensive walls. Some stretched across mountain ridges, others protected fertile valleys or important trade routes. Most looked nothing like the stone walls tourists visit today. They were usually built from compacted earth, timber, gravel, and whatever materials existed nearby. At first, these weren't pieces of one giant project. They were separate solutions to local problems. Only centuries later would many of them become connected into something history would remember as the Great Wall. Everything changed in 221 BC. After decades of warfare, Qin Shi Huang unified the competing kingdoms and became the first emperor of a unified China. For the first time, many of the internal walls separating rival states no longer served a purpose. Instead, attention shifted toward protecting the empire's vast northern frontier from powerful nomadic confederations such as the Xiongnu. The emperor didn't order workers to begin from nothing. He ordered them to connect, strengthen, extend, and rebuild existing fortifications while adding entirely new sections where needed. This decision transformed scattered defensive lines into a much larger frontier system. The challenge was enormous. The terrain changed constantly. Open grasslands gave way to rugged mountains. Dry deserts stretched for hundreds of kilometers before giving way to river valleys. No single construction method could work everywhere, so the builders adapted. Where stone was plentiful, they used stone. Where only earth existed, they packed layers of soil until they hardened into remarkably durable walls. Where timber was abundant, wooden frameworks reinforced the structure. The Great Wall wasn't one design repeated thousands of miles. It was thousands of local engineering solutions connected by one strategic purpose. And once construction began, another question emerged that still amazes historians today. How could ancient workers move enough material across some of the world's most unforgiving landscapes to create a barrier on such an unimaginable scale? The secret wasn't transporting everything. It was transporting almost nothing. Modern construction often depends on moving materials over enormous distances. Ancient builders couldn't afford that luxury. Hauling heavy stone hundreds of kilometers by hand or animal power would have consumed enormous amounts of time, food, and labor. So they used the landscape itself. In mountain regions, workers cut stone directly from nearby cliffs. In the vast plains of northern China, they dug local soil and gravel. In desert regions, builders stacked layers of sand, reeds, gravel, and compacted earth, creating surprisingly durable barriers that could withstand harsh climates for centuries. Every section reflected its environment. That's why no two parts of the Great Wall look exactly alike. Some are built almost entirely from brick. Others consist of rough stone fitted together. Many of the oldest surviving stretches are simply enormous banks of hardened earth. This wasn't inconsistency. It was intelligent engineering. The builders understood a timeless principle. The strongest material is often the one already beneath your feet. But using local materials created another challenge. How do you turn loose dirt into a wall strong enough to survive for centuries? The answer was a remarkably effective technique known today as rammed earth. Workers built wooden frames on either side of the future wall. They poured layers of soil, gravel, sand, and clay between the frames, then pounded each layer repeatedly with heavy wooden tampers until it became densely compacted. Only after one layer hardened did they add the next. Again, and again, and again. The process was exhausting, yet it produced structures far stronger than loose soil alone. In the dry climates of northern and western China, some rammed earth walls have survived for more than 2,000 years despite constant exposure to wind, rain, and extreme temperatures. During later dynasties, especially the Ming dynasty, builders expanded on these methods. They covered many strategic sections with fired bricks and carefully shaped stone, creating the iconic walls seen in photographs today. Lime-based mortar, and in some regions mortar strengthened with sticky rice soup, improved durability, and helped bind masonry together. The famous stone wall wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the result of centuries of refinement, and none of it would have mattered without the people who carried, lifted, shaped, and assembled millions of tons of material by hand. The scale of that human effort is almost impossible to comprehend, and the organization behind it was every bit as remarkable as the wall itself. Who actually built the Great Wall? For centuries, the simplest answer was millions of workers. The real answer is far more complex. Construction stretched across many dynasties over nearly 2,000 years, so the workforce constantly changed. Professional soldiers built frontier defenses while stationed along the border. Local farmers were drafted for periods of labor, especially during seasons when agricultural work was lighter. Skilled masons, carpenters, blacksmiths, engineers, and surveyors handled the most demanding construction. Convicted criminals and political prisoners were also assigned to certain projects, particularly during the Qin dynasty. It was one of the largest labor efforts in human history. Conditions were often brutal. Workers faced freezing mountain winters, scorching desert summers, dangerous cliffs, disease, hunger, and exhaustion. Many never returned home. Ancient records and later historical accounts describe tremendous loss of life during some construction campaigns, although the exact numbers remain unknown and are often exaggerated in folklore. One popular legend claims that workers who died were buried inside the wall itself. Archaeological evidence does not support that story. Human remains discovered near sections of the wall come from cemeteries or nearby settlements, not from bodies sealed into the structure. Burying workers inside the wall would actually have weakened the construction rather than strengthened it. The truth is tragic enough without mythology. Many laborers died building the wall. They simply weren't entombed within it. Even if you had unlimited workers, another problem remained. How do you feed them? Imagine thousands of people scattered across remote mountains where almost nothing grows. Food became as important as bricks. The Chinese state developed enormous supply systems to keep construction moving. Grain traveled by cart, pack animals, riverboats, and eventually along carefully organized transport routes. Temporary camps appeared near construction zones. Wells were dug wherever possible. Supply depots stored food, tools, rope, timber, and replacement equipment. Building the wall became a logistical operation as much as an engineering one. Every stone lifted depended on someone delivering the hammer. Every worker depended on someone delivering the next meal. A breakdown anywhere in the supply chain could stop construction hundreds of kilometers away. The wall wasn't simply a line across the landscape. It was a network of people solving thousands of problems every single day. And perhaps the greatest challenge of all still lay ahead. Because constructing a wall across flat land is difficult, building one across razor-sharp mountain ridges is something else entirely. Stand on one of the highest sections of the Great Wall today, and you'll immediately notice something remarkable. The wall doesn't fight the mountains. It follows them. Instead of carving perfectly straight paths through impossible terrain, Chinese engineers allowed the landscape to dictate the route. The wall snakes across narrow ridges, climbs steep slopes, drops into valleys, and rises again over distant peaks. From above, it almost looks alive. That decision wasn't about beauty. It was about strategy. Mountain ridges already provided natural defensive advantages. Building directly along the highest ground allowed soldiers to see approaching enemies from great distances while forcing attackers to climb exhausting slopes before ever reaching the wall itself. Of course, that created enormous construction problems. Every stone, brick, timber beam, and tool had to reach places where carts often couldn't travel. In many regions, workers carried materials by hand using shoulder poles, baskets, sleds, or pack animals wherever narrow trails allowed. Temporary paths were cut into hillsides, and simple lifting devices such as ropes, wooden rollers, and inclined ramps helped move heavy loads upward. There were no shortcuts. Every meter of elevation demanded more effort than the last. The higher the wall climbed, the harder every brick became to place. But a wall by itself cannot defend an empire. It has to communicate. Imagine spotting a cavalry force racing toward the frontier. Without a warning system, defenders farther down the line would know nothing until the enemy arrived. The builders solved this with an impressive chain of watchtowers, beacon towers, and fortified passes spread across the frontier. Soldiers stationed in these towers constantly observed the surrounding landscape. During the day, smoke signals carried warnings across great distances. At night, beacon fires illuminated the ridgelines. Drums, bells, and signal flags could also be used depending on local conditions. A message could travel astonishingly quickly. One tower saw danger. The next repeated the signal, then another, and another. Warnings moved across the frontier far faster than any rider could gallop over rough terrain. The Great Wall was never intended to be an impenetrable barrier. That would have been impossible across thousands of miles. Instead, it functioned as part of an integrated defense system. It slowed invaders, concentrated movement toward fortified passes, protected garrisons, and gave the empire precious time to organize its armies before an attack reached the interior. The wall wasn't simply made of earth, stone, and brick. It was built from information, and that may have been its greatest strength. Yet despite all this planning and engineering, the wall would eventually face a challenge no amount of masonry could solve. If the Great Wall was so massive, why wasn't it impossible to cross? Because walls don't defeat armies. People do. History records several occasions when northern forces breached China's frontier despite the existence of defensive walls. Sometimes attackers found weakly defended sections. Sometimes they bypassed fortified areas entirely. On other occasions, commanders opened gates through bribery, political betrayal, or military necessity. One of the most significant moments came in 1644. As the Ming dynasty struggled with internal rebellion, the general Wu Songui opened the strategically vital Shanhai Pass to Manchu forces. Rather than climbing over thousands of miles of walls, the Manchus entered through one of its most important gateways. That decision helped pave the way for the Qing dynasty to rule China for nearly 3 centuries. The lesson is surprisingly modern. No fortification can replace political stability, capable leadership, or loyal defenders. The Great Wall bought time. It created obstacles. It protected countless communities. But no wall, regardless of size, could guarantee permanent security against changing human decisions. So where does the famous number of 13,000 miles actually come from? Many people imagine one continuous wall stretching across China like a giant stone ribbon. That's not what exists. In 2012, a comprehensive archaeological survey by Chinese authorities calculated that the Great Wall system, including walls built by different dynasties, trenches, natural defensive barriers, branches, and secondary fortifications, extended for approximately 21,196 kilometers, or about 13,170 miles. That figure represents an entire network, not one uninterrupted structure. Some sections disappeared centuries ago through erosion and weather. Others were dismantled by local communities that reused bricks and stones for houses, roads, and farms. Certain stretches remain remarkably intact, while others survive only as low ridges of compacted earth almost hidden beneath grass. The wall people visit today is only part of a much larger story. Every surviving section represents thousands of forgotten workers whose names never entered history. Most of them never imagined tourists would someday climb those same stones and taking photographs of a project that consumed generations. And after nearly 2,000 years of construction, rebuilding, abandonment, and restoration, the greatest achievement of the Great Wall may not be its incredible length at all. It may be what that length reveals about the extraordinary patience of human civilization. There's one final myth about the Great Wall that refuses to disappear. You've probably heard that it's the only human-made structure visible from space with the naked eye. It sounds believable. After all, a wall stretching more than 13,000 miles should stand out against the Earth. The reality is very different. Astronauts who have orbited Earth have repeatedly explained that the Great Wall is extremely difficult to see without cameras or magnification. Although it's incredibly long, it's also relatively narrow and often blends into the mountains, deserts, and valleys where it was built. Roads, cities, airports, and even large agricultural patterns are often easier to spot from orbit. Its greatness was never about being visible from space. Its greatness was always about what it represented on the ground. For centuries, it marked the edge of empires, protected trade routes, guided soldiers across dangerous frontiers, and connected distant garrisons into one coordinated defense system. The wall became a symbol, not because it was perfect. It became a symbol because generation after generation refused to abandon it. When you stand on the Great Wall today, it's easy to admire the sweeping views and towering stone battlements. What you can't see are the millions of individual moments that made it possible. A worker lifting one more basket of earth, a mason shaping another brick, a carpenter repairing a wooden frame, a soldier watching the horizon through a freezing winter night, an engineer deciding that the wall should follow one ridge instead of another. Each decision seemed insignificant on its own. Together, they created one of the most ambitious construction projects in human history. The Great Wall wasn't built by one emperor. It wasn't completed in one century. And it certainly wasn't the product of one brilliant idea. It was the accumulated effort of countless ordinary people spread across nearly 2,000 years, each adding a small piece to something far larger than themselves. That's why the Great Wall still captures the world's imagination. Not because it's made of stone, not because it stretches across mountains, but because it proves that human beings can achieve extraordinary things when persistence outlasts generations. The wall may span more than 13,000 miles, yet its greatest legacy isn't measured in distance. It's measured in the determination of the hands that built it. One brick, one basket of earth, and one impossible day at a time.